Hi, I'm Michael Croker, and this is Park Life. I've worked in the Australian theme park industry for a little over 30 years, and in this podcast series, I spend time in conversation with the people inside the business of making memories. Thanks for joining me. I hope you can subscribe, rate, and review. Enjoy the ride. Hi, and welcome to episode 18, season 1 of Park Life. My guest is Dave Eastgate. As you'll hear, Dave doesn't really fit into a single category. His theme park career has taken him through multiple parks and roles, but his life has been so much more. A professional musician and highly regarded stand-up comedian, he continues to live out his passions with an unmatched enthusiasm. Our conversation here is frank and open. It's also the very first conversation we've ever had beyond a good morning on one occasion at Warner Brothers Movie World, where Dave currently performs in the Hollywood Stunt Driver 2 production. Please be aware, we do touch on themes of mental health and well-being during our time together. If you find these themes are relevant to you and our exchange does bring some thoughts and feelings forward, please do seek out professional healthcare support and guidance as necessary. I'm sure you'll enjoy getting to know Dave Eastgate. I began by asking, where did it all begin?
I started at DREAMWORLD in 1995, the summer of 95. I saw Mum saw an ad in the paper, and I did an audition and I got into the Bushranger show and did Kenny Koala. And
for those that are listening that maybe don't know, so Kenny Koala is a character suit role, yeah?
Character suit role at DREAMWORLD. Yeah. So I did DREAMWORLD for about 3 years. Then I moved into a live cabaret show with our good mates Tommy Gillander and Simon Mallory.
I'm just going to pause you to go back a bit. How old were you when you started at DREAMWORLD?
I was 16 when I started at DREAMWORLD.
What was the appeal of even doing that? Were you an artsy kid?
Yes, I was. I grew up in Papua New Guinea, and my mum kind of identified pretty early that I was craving attention. And she put me into a performance school run by the famous Dame Carol Kiddu, who probably most people listening wouldn't know who I'm talking about, but if you're from PNG, you know that she's a big deal over there. So I was always doing theatre sports at school. I was always doing musicals. I did a musical with Sophie Monk. I did Les Mis with a very famous Australian performer, Sophie Monk, and you would know Lockie Parkinson as well. So we all did a musical together at high school, and then I wanted to get into acting. That was my main thing, and I tried to get into QUT, which is the local uni here, to do acting, and my grades weren't good enough. I thought I had all the talent, but I didn't have that discipline. I didn't have the hard work. I didn't have the grades, and I didn't get into acting school, and it really devastated me. I thought, what am I going to do now? And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because everything in my whole career has come off the back of getting that gig at DREAMWORLD, in the stunt in the stunt show.
Just to stay in that space, I don't mean to cut you off, but without making this about me, and again, we're just getting to know each other as we do this. I auditioned for the National Institute of Dramatic Art when I was 17, or NIDA. Yep. And they were taking at the time 2 people from each state into a 3-year course out of Sydney. Mm-hmm. And the short version of that story is I made it down to the final 4 and then missed out making it to the final 2, and went back from Brisbane to Townsville with my tail between my legs, scared, because it's like, well, if I'm not doing that, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. And then a gig at SeaWorld saved my life.
Right, there you go.
So DREAMWORLD was obviously something for you that was a platform now for you to flower as a performer?
Yeah, totally. And so my dad was in the army, my whole family is army.
Don't mean to cut you off. My mum and dad were Air Force.
Oh wow, so there you go.
So you were hopping states?
So just going different states, different countries, Papua New Guinea for most of my childhood, and then come back to the Gold Coast. And so back in those days, you would graduate high school at the age of 17 in Queensland. They've now changed it to 18. I was 16 when I graduated because I'd been so messed up with my schooling. And so that was one of the... So I didn't apply for NIDA because I knew that NIDA only took people who had a bit of life experience. They only took people who were kind of 19, 20.
And in that space, the advice I got from the guy that told me I was unsuccessful was, Michael, we see something in there, but this course will crush you in the first 6 months. So he said to me, and I remember thinking, all I'm hearing is no. I couldn't take in his words, but it made sense years later, and I've since used similar words. And he said, you need to go out, fall in love, fall out of love, get your heart broken, and then he said, never forgot it, taste blood on your lips, get back up, wipe the blood off, take a breath, dust yourself off, then come back and see me and do what you did again. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. But effectively, he was saying what you just said.
Yeah.
You haven't lived, mate.
No, exactly.
You're high on what you think your talents are.
Yeah.
But you haven't been tempered by life.
Yes.
Which will make your performance choices more honest and more compelling.
Oh, totally.
But you don't know what you don't know at the time that you don't know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you find yourself in DreamWorld, and this is a great period in your life?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful time. It was just, doing... The stunt show was so much fun, working with, men. I mean, that I was 16, these guys were, they were 22 or whatever. Yeah. But to me, they were these, big shots and made some wonderful friends. But the thing that I loved about DreamWorld was we called them in-park characters. Here it's called Atmosphere. Universal, they call it Atmosphere. There we called it in-park characters. And you could... And so one day you'd be rostered on the stunt show, the next day you're rostered on as Kenny Koala, the next day you're an in-park character. And basically we had free reign of this. There was this costume department. It was just full of... Just this room just had all these costumes in there. And you could just go in and pick a costume and go out on the street and do Atmos. And that was the best thing in the world for me. I just absolutely took to it like a duck to water. And, at the time I was working with the great, it was Tony Laffins last year as Casey the Clown. I don't know if you remember him.
I worked with Tony with his Illusion show at Wonderland Sydney.
Of course.
For 5 years.
Of course. Yeah. Well, he's the guy that replaced Tony was Goldie the Clown. He's still to this day my best friend. Yeah. He's now in the circus doing circus clowning. But Mal Wood, who you had on the
beautiful guy,
beautiful guy.
Yeah.
And working with these amazing performers and watching them command an audience on the street out of nothing. Yeah. And
is this the beginning of your comedy chops? Without you knowing it at the time, is that where your comedy chops are starting?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I got into the theatre course at Griffith. Yeah. And then as soon as I turned 18, I started doing stand-up comedy in the clubs in Brisbane at the Sit Down Comedy Club.
That's a big deal, making that transition into comedy, because it's a world unto itself. Who were instrumental in driving that in you in terms of comics? Because I often hear that first-time comedians will usually spend the first part of their career in imitation of style. So whether it's a Pryor, or they're looking for their thing, but it usually begins with, well, his thing seems like it could be my thing. Were there inspirations?
Lano and Woodley.
Wow,
were
going back.
Massive. Yeah. And so this is at the time when... So... this guy that I auditioned for DreamWorld with, Lockie Parkinson, he was my best friend during high school. We knew each other from Papua New Guinea. We went to primary school together in Papua New Guinea. And he didn't want to audition for DreamWorld that day. And he was staying with us. And Mum's dropped us off at the gate, and Mum goes, "Go on, Parko, just go in and do the audition." Then he ended up having a wonderful career as a stuntman over here at Movie World and then in the movies and all that sort of stuff. But at the time we had a double act in our comedy thing, so we were very much looking at those double acts, that Lano Woodley, Abbott and Costello. But one of my biggest influences in comedy and just in entertainment more broadly was Robin Williams. Because he was an actor. But he'd come from that stand-up background, and so stand up for me as well was this thing where it was like, well, okay, if I'm not going to get into the drama school, then I'm going to follow that path that Jim Carrey followed, you know, that those guys did. And as a side note, years later, in 2010, I was performing at a stand-up comedy club in King's Cross in Sydney, and Robin Williams happened to be there that night. I swear on my life. And he
did he see your bit?
He saw I could hear him laugh. I'd get goosebumps.
Here.
I could just. He was there. He was in town filming Happy Feet 2, and there was a whole bunch of other stand-up comedians from America and Australia that were involved in the production, and they had been coming out and doing 5-minute spots, 10-minute spots at all the local rooms around Sydney, and they kind of had their rap party at this comedy night. Gary Eck was their headliner, and he was one of the writers on Happy Feet, so he was the headliner. I was the MC. Another guy called Desh was the local Brisbane guy. Desh was the support act, and I got up and I did my best. I did my closer first. I just came out all guns blazing.
Do you know at that point he's in the room?
Yeah. And
sorry, I don't want you to lose your thread. When you know that Robin Williams is in the room and you're about to get out there and do stand up before a man that for many years was a god.
Oh, to me,
how do you keep yourself together? How do you get out of your own way? How do you not lock up? I don't understand.
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It was. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. This is my guy.
Wow.
You know, this is my guy. This is not my chance, but it was. I knew what I could do. I'd been doing it long enough by then, and I just knew that I was gonna smash it. And
did you kill?
I absolutely killed it. And then I came off stage, and he.
Sorry to cut you. I just want to go. I want to be in the moment with you. Was there a moment when you said you heard him laughing? Yeah. Was there a moment when you knew that's his laugh and he's?
Oh yeah, straight away.
And it was loud?
Oh, belly laugh.
I can't even comprehend
and
that.
Just, oh my God. And so just like, you know, I can hear him laughing, and that's just energizing me more.
Yeah.
And my style is that high energy,
stream of consciousness.
Yeah, that really frenetic kind of stuff. And it's musical as well. So, you know, I kind of knew that the songs were funny, and my delivery was I was just in the zone.
Yeah.
You know. And the more he laughed, the more in the zone I felt. And I came off, and at that point I hadn't spoken to him, and he grabbed me and he said, "That was effing beautiful, man," and hugged me. And
that's incredible.
It was incredible. And then so in the break we were hanging out in the green room, and afterwards we hung out. And he wasn't going to get up and he wasn't going to do the spot.
Yeah.
He was just there to watch. And because I said to him, "Oh, are you going to get up?" And he was like, "Oh, no, I'm just here to watch." And eventually something happened, and he got up and he did like this 20-minute bit. And it's on YouTube.
You can see it, yeah.
It's Robin Williams in Sydney.
Wow.
2010. And so in answer to your question, that's what I wanted my trajectory to be, was okay, I'm going to get into stand-up, and then that's going to lead into acting, and then that's going to lead into, you know, and Saturday Night Live was where I wanted to go.
I almost feel like we can just stop the interview now, right? Because for a lot of people, that's Everest. You know, you've done your comedy in a room, and one of your idols is there, and he's telling you it's effing brilliant, and he hugs you. What do you do after that? How did that? And again, I don't want to stop your flow. We'll come back to that point. When he passed, what was the impact of him leaving the world like he did on you? Do you remember where you were or what that was?
Yeah. And oh man, I get emotional now just thinking about it. And every year on the anniversary, it gets comedy is is difficult, and I related to. I've had those feelings. I've been in those darker places, and it's, without going too deep into it, when your job is to be the funny guy, and you're the funny guy, you're the fun guy. Deep down, you're just like everybody else, and you've got your own demons that you're battling, and often part of the desire to be funny is coming from a place of hurt and pain, and and I mean, I always say that all comedy comes from pain, because at some level it has to, as I say, my whole family was army. My brother's 4th generation in the army. My sister's married to a guy in the army. And I think, for me, there was this, I was a middle child. I had a lot of moving around. I guess you use humor as a way to fit in. And so yeah, when he passed, it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And yeah, and every year around that time, because I've got a beautiful photo of us together.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's an incredible story. That you obviously scaled some heights there with comedy in a relatively quick amount of time. What comes next in terms of your comedy journey? Was that a path that you thought, I'll stick with this and see how far I can take it, or did you find yourself still keen to kind of move back into a theme park life? I mean, where did you?
Well, yeah, it's so basically going back to the journeys that I left DreamWorld and I came to Movie World. I did Austin Powers when I was here. I did the character suits. I did the Police Academy show, and then I left here and went to Universal Studios Japan, and that's a huge part of my life and my story and my journey. Was that I went over and I did the Terminator 2 stunt show, and I did a couple of street shows, and then I learnt Japanese. And I started doing Japanese. I started playing in some punk bands in Japan and touring around in a Celtic punk band.
It's really hard to keep up with you, because I almost want to stop you and go back to the movie world and then the universe. Yeah. I guess
there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, but I think your life has obviously been sprawling, and so maybe I don't want to continue to stop your flow because it's fascinating. But you just said you were playing Celtic punk in a Japanese...
Japanese Celtic punks. So it's all like...
What was the band called?
We were called The Clovers.
Right.
And it was loud electric guitars,
right.
mohawks.
I'm going to try and string all this together,
kilts.
so bear with me.
Yeah.
So I want to pick it up from Universal, absolutely.
Okay.
But these are all very different disciplines that most people will work a lifetime to get their 10,000 hours up on any one of them.
Right.
You've got strings of getting your 10,000 hours up across these parks in terms of script and intention, with character choices and improvisation and character development and character impersonation. Then you've got your comedy chops that are sharpening up all at the same time. Then there's music. And as a guitarist, I mean, just to stay in that space for a little bit and then pick up again at Universal. When did you start playing music? Was this happening as a kid as well? Or?
No, I always sang.
Right.
And at that school in PNG, I did dance as well.
Right.
And no, when I worked at DreamWorld, there was a couple of guys came in and started doing the Bush Ranger show with us, and they were in a band called George.
Of course.
Ended up becoming...
Polly Serena was the debut album.
It debuted at number one.
Yeah, broke ground.
Yeah. So
the brother and sister Katie Noonan?
Katie Noonan and Tyrone Noonan.
Yes.
And then there were the two twin brothers, Nick and Jim Stewart. Yeah. And I was living with Nick at the time, and he taught me guitar, and he I would follow them around to all of their gigs, and then I started a band with Nick, and his brother ended up becoming a very famous actor who's on Home and Away these days. And that's where I started. But I'd been singing in bands since like primary school. We started our first crappy band in Papua New Guinea in primary school, playing bad heavy metal. But it was always rock and roll and music, and it was always a part of my life.
Yeah.
And I randomly met this guy in Japan playing bagpipes. This guy with a mohawk playing bagpipes.
A Japanese guy.
Yeah, busking in the street.
Wow.
And we had some mutual friends, and he asked me to join his band, and we toured. And
just to slow you down a little bit.
Yeah.
When you went for the gig at Universal Japan, could you speak Japanese before you went?
Not a lick.
So, what did you know going into it? I'm going to throw myself into this language, and then if you did, how long before you felt like it took? Was it accelerated learning because you're around?
It was.
The people?
It was. And growing up in Papua New Guinea, I'd already had a second language as a kid.
Right.
So, so I pick up languages fairly easily. I'm learning Arabic at the moment.
Amazing.
And so, but Japanese was very foreign to me, and I didn't. But I was working. The first show that I did there was an atmosphere show, and we were in the Jurassic Park area. It's very kind of politically incorrect now, but we were dressed up in grass skirts, and we were these tribesmen from this lost tribe, and we were just kind of roaming around the Jurassic Park area getting photos with people. So at first I was speaking gibberish, and then it became, and then people would I would ask people to teach me certain phrases.
Right.
So it'd be all gibberish, and then I'd say something funny in Japanese.
Yes.
And then that would get a reaction.
Right.
And so slowly I started building my vocabulary like that.
Yeah.
And it was off, and then it was dating girls and you know, my goodness.
Immersing yourself in the culture.
Immersing myself completely in the culture.
It's a beautiful culture too.
I loved it. And I didn't hang out with all the other foreigners. I made friends with Japanese people, and my best friend in Japan, he played in a punk band, and so I would go to their gigs all the time, and he knew that I liked comedy, and he knew that I was doing these street characters, because then we moved, they got rid of that one, and we went to the New York area and dressed up as gangsters, these old kind of mafia gangster guys. And again, it was just like, well, how do I say this? How do I say that? And then people would give me suggestions. Hey, you should say this, or you should say that. And then eventually it built and it built and it built. And I had my little routines, and then they gave me just free rein. My boss there, Mike Davis, just bless him.
Saw what you were and who you were.
I owe so much to that guy.
Right, let you off the chain.
He did. He really did. He, in the end, there's a couple of other characters that we tried, but in the end, he basically gave me a skateboard and an electric guitar with a built-in amplifier.
Great.
And just let me loose in the park, and I would play Japanese kid songs, but in a punk kind of Jack Black kind of style. Yeah. And we'd set up I did it with a mate, and we'd just set the skateboards up and start playing, start vamping, and then a crowd would build, and then we'd just go off to the other thing. And
all improv in terms of the songs, or
no, the songs we'd rehearsed, but all the improv in between the shows, getting to and from, like just skating around and just going, oh well, let's stop here. Or not even stopping, just skating around and just seeing a family and just going up to the family and going, just playing with them.
Create a moment.
Yeah, and listening to your chat with Mal Wood the other day, he was talking a lot about that. Just that's what I love about theme parks. And even when I'd left theme parks and I was working in television, you know, and doing all the things that I always wanted to do, I always said to people, particularly in television, because television's so boring to make. I love being on TV, but it's quite laborious. And I would always say, my favourite job in the world was atmosphere entertainment in theme parks, because like you say, you're creating magic.
Yeah.
Because in stand-up, they've paid to come and see either you, or it says comedy club, and they go, all right, well, this is where we get our comedy from. So they've and, you know, with theatre, they've come to see you in that. TV, same thing. Whereas in a theme park with atmosphere, you're just the little happening in between them going from this show to that ride, or that ride to that ice cream parlour, or they don't expect to see you. You're not kind of part of it. Suddenly, pow, there's this character in front of them, you know, and particularly in Japan, suddenly there's this white guy with a big blonde mohawk, you know, speaking Japanese to me, and you know, and basically it was dad jokes in my Japanese, and so, which is why, so I get to a point in Japan where I start doing stand-up in Japanese. I start doing a bit of TV stuff.
So just in that space, comedy has its beats and it has its its laws around it, which I don't pretend to know intimately. But there's when you're putting together comedy in another language, surely there's a need to be aware of how the beats will ring differently. The choices will have to be slightly adjusted, aren't they? And did you have mentorship there, or is that something you just intuitively felt and trusted?
It's a good question, and I get asked that a lot, because it's, and a lot of people, I use this example, like a lot of people talk about the difference between British comedy and American comedy, and I always kind of pull them up and say, hang on, when you think about it, like, you know, American comedy is this, and then British comedy is that. It's like, well, no. British comedy, there's a whole spectrum of British comedy. There's really thoughtful, intellectual British comedy, and there's Benny Hill,
and farce.
Yeah, and then again with American comedy, you've got you know, you've got your Get Smart, and you've got your Mel Brooks, and but you've also got Curb Your Enthusiasm, you've got Seinfeld, you've got all these you've got really crass American stand-up, but you've also got really thoughtful George Carlin stand-up, and then so but what separates comedy is all those beats. And what I noticed when I watched Japanese comedy, and weirdly enough, Japanese comedy is all double acts, and I always wanted to be a double act, but Lockie wanted to be a stunt man, so that didn't happen. So I always wanted to be a double act, and most of their stand-up, 95% of their stand-ups are double acts.
Yeah.
And so I'd watch them on TV before I could speak Japanese. I could feel the rhythm, and I could feel the beats. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, but I knew where the laughs were going to be, and I could feel that tension, and I could see that working.
It's like music, huh?
It is. It's exactly like that. Yeah. And so what separates comedy is not American comedy and Japanese comedy is different. Comedy's pretty much the same.
Right.
We still laugh at the same things. Again, we laugh at pain. We laugh when someone stubs their toe. You know, that whole thing of tragedies when I stub my toe, and comedies when you stub your toe.
Yes.
And so what changes is references. So it took a while for me to an American will come over here and watch an Australian stand-up, and you do a joke about, I don't know, Gimpy, for example, or whatever, or you do a joke about the Prime Minister, and they don't know who the Prime Minister is, so they don't get that joke. But if you explained the context and the context of that reference, then they go, oh, okay, I see why that makes sense. They might not get a laugh, but you can understand the jokes. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
It's the same in Japanese.
Yeah.
When jokes were explained to me, I was like, oh yeah, I get that. That works. And so I got to a point with my comedy where I trusted my best mate, who was in this punk band. He wasn't my comedy partner. My double act partner worked at the theme park as a atmosphere performer. And he'd gone to the National School of Comedy. They have like it's their NIDA, but for comedians. It's amazing. So he and he's become a successful, famous comedian over there now. But I asked my other mate, whose opinion I trusted a bit more, and I just said, what do you think of my comedy? And he said this. He said that my comedy was wakari yasui, and wakari means thought, yasui means cheap.
Wow.
Which is interesting. And I went, oh wow, okay, cheap thought, and it's the exact same analogy that it's a cheap joke. And so it was bad puns, it was dad jokes, it was because my Japanese wasn't nuanced, my Japanese wasn't, I was fluent, but I wasn't deeply nuanced. I didn't have all those references. And it was and so we were getting some success, but it was based on me being a bit of a novelty. Yeah. And it was all based on me mistaking the language and mistaking the norms and all that sort of stuff.
How does a note that's a great note to get with just 2 words that says 1,000 things. And someone's that honest with you. What's your first response to that? Because it doesn't seem like you've been someone living with fear about what you're capable of doing. It seems like you've always trusted yourself enough to go, I'll leap into this and I'll find my way. And when you get a note like that, is that your attitude? I take that, I understand it.
Yep.
You don't block it. You don't.
Well, comedy, and even out here in the park, you got to fail. You got to make mistakes. You got to stuff up. You got to not get laughs. It's really important. It's they call it you either kill on stage in comedy. You either kill or you die. Yeah. Or you bomb. And it does feel like that when you're out on stage in front of a crowd and you bomb. It's awful. I did a gig in Birmingham. So I did this gig in Birmingham in the UK.
Comedy Fest or?
I was on my way to Edinburgh.
Right, yeah.
And so we were driving up and I did some gigs on the way up, and I was headlining this show, and I'd done a whole bunch of gigs in the UK by this stage, and I'd done that show for Robin Williams, and I'd done all these cool things, and I was well into my career. And this one night I just had a bad night, and they booed me off stage, and I went back and I just burst into tears.
Just in that space, I often hear when I've listened to podcasts with comics talking, and it seems to be a joke, and maybe I'm misrepresenting this. It seems to be a joke about, you're blaming your audience.
Never blame the audience.
No, that seems to be like a code. I'll often hear comics talk about, you're going to blame the audience.
Yeah.
Do you ever have, can you ever get away with saying, it's the room? Because I remember hearing, I think it was Mark Maron in a podcast talk about when he starts, he said, I can almost feel, there's that guy in the room, there's one of those guys in the room, there's a heckle, he reckons he can, he describes feeling a tone. I think I know how tonight's going to go with you guys. Do you feel that? Is it
100%? Yeah. And you've got to read the room. 2 nights ago, I did a gig at the Sit Down Comedy Club, and I had to kick this woman out. I kicked this couple out. I got security in because she just wouldn't stop, because she was heckling in a way where it was my stuff is very disjointed. I interrupt myself a lot in my comedy, and that's part of the joke and silence is really important in comedy. That beat before you say what you're about to say. And you get hecklers when they get drunk enough
coming in that space,
just right in on that spot. You're like, no, oh, man. And so I shut her down. She'd been told a couple of times by the other comedians to stop. I'm the final comedian on. I'm the headliner, and about halfway through my set, I'd already spent enough time telling this person to shut up, and I just kicked her out. And so in that instance,
did she go freely?
No. It was
messy.
Oh, it was very messy. And then the other people in the crowd were going, "Come on, get on with it." And I won them back.
Yeah.
I won them back, but it was touch and go there for a second, but that was, yes, that's a rule. Never blame the audience, but there are exceptions to that rule.
Yeah.
But in answer to the question about the note, it hurt a little bit, but also I kind of knew that anyway. Yeah. It wasn't a big surprise, and I thought, well, I can stay in Japan. I had a beautiful girlfriend who was a reggae singer, quite a famous reggae singer, believe it or not. And but I had this burning desire to. There was something I needed to prove to myself. I still wanted to be an actor. I still wanted to be an actor. I still wanted to do TV and movies, and I wanted to prove. I didn't want to just be a novelty act in Japan, and I knew that for me to get to the level of nuanced comedy, and there is an Australian comedian over there who's very famous now, and at the time he wasn't. And we were kind of rivals.
You were aware of each other.
Yeah, we were aware of each other. Yeah. Actually, some powers that be in the comedy industry over there hooked us up to kind of spur us on to be competitive with each other.
Create some tension.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other story.
But
anyway, so I got to a point where I was like, okay, well, I need to come home and I need to do. If I stay in Japan, I'm never going to be able to play America. I'm never going to be able to do the Edinburgh Festival. I need to do comedy in my own language. And I came back in 2006 and oh boy, I just went, I've made the biggest mistake of my life.
Why?
Well, because I was doing open mic comedy and it wasn't working the way I thought it was going to work. And I was just...
What was that? Was it material? Was it the regional thing, the shift back into the culture?
Yeah, it was all of the above.
Yeah.
It just took me a while to find my voice, really. As I'd done it prior to leaving for Japan and came back, a lot of the stuff that I did prior to Japan was very character based. So I performed characters on stage, and there was costumes and costume changes and backing tracks and the guitar and all these sorts of things. And one night I bombed, and a great comedian from Brisbane, Rob Brown, sat me down, and I was just despondent because I knew that I could do it. And he just said, mate, just be yourself. Just be you. You're good. And as soon as I dropped all the pretense, and so instead of going on stage dressed as a character, or having a costume or a hat or a backing track, I just go, I met this guy the other day and he sounded like this. Boom. So then it's coming from a place of truth and not pretense. So
did you see a shift?
Yeah. Immediately.
Right. It's
immediately. And then that kind of took off, and it was around that time they were filming Big Brother at DREAMWORLD, and they were looking for a writer for the host, and I got a job there as a writer, and the host was Mike Goldman, and he was also the warm-up guy, and so he said to me, hey, I don't want to do this warm-up caper anymore, you're a comedian, do you want to do it? And I was like, mate, all my experience in theme parks, that's perfect for what this is. Family entertainment, improvising, filling, connecting with the audiences, and so that was the big thing for me, was getting warm up. Went from Big Brother to Australian Idol, to So You Think You Can Dance, X Factor, The Voice, Australia's Got Talent, and that enabled me to move to Sydney.
But that's an incredible rise for people that are listening that maybe aren't in the country. Those programs you've just listed, they're high profile. It's like a top 5, top 10.
Well, yeah. Well, Australian Idol is American Idol.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
so you're hopping around all of that. Was that, how many years are we talking there? Is that a period?
That's about 10 years I did that for.
Wow.
And
where did that feel like it was going, and where were you hoping it would land you?
Well, that's the thing, Michael. It was a weird. It was a weird time, because during that whole time I started getting acting roles in TV shows. So and award-winning shows, A Moody Christmas, The Moodies on the ABC. I did 3 sketch comedy shows. All of them got cancelled after the first season. And sketch comedy was something that as I said, I always wanted to be in Saturday Night Live, because sketch enabled you to act, to do songs, to play characters, and to be funny. And so I did 3 separate. The last one that I did was for Comedy Channel, and the Australian viewers will know who I'm talking about when I say Magda Zabansky, Jane Turner, Gina Riley, Glenn Robbins, Stephen Curry, Shane Jacobson, working with these legends. Yeah. I did a sketch. There's a 2-hander sketch on YouTube. You can find it. Yeah. It has got very little views. I don't know why, but it's the Sting sketch. It's called the Sting sketch. Yeah. Open slather. Just type it in. It's just me and Sting. Sting.
The police.
Sting.
Well, hang on. How does that even come about?
So Sting and I did a sketch together on this show, on this TV show. But then the TV show bombed, and I shouldn't say that, but it kind of did. It got cancelled. But anyway,
so that sketch you're doing with him, is that? There's 100 stories behind this, I bet. But who wrote the sketch?
So his former nanny was a writer on our show, and he was on tour out here with Paul Simon. He was out here on tour with Paul Simon, and as I say, his nanny was a writer on the show, and so we got him in to do this sketch. We wrote a sketch, and it was the first sketch we filmed for the entire series.
So hang on, how do you pull a name like that and get him on side? Obviously, the sketch reads well for him.
The sketch read well. It was, as I say, it was his nanny.
Right. Okay.
So he had a really good relationship.
He's relaxed and chilled.
Writer and
it's just a 2-hander.
It's just a 2-hander. It's just me and Sting, and it was incredible, because the day before, and the Australian audiences will will relate to this more, but the day before, they flew me down from Sydney to Melbourne to shoot this sketch, and the day before I had to rehearse with Glenn Robbins. Yeah. Now, Glenn Robbins, for those who don't know, is one of the greatest Australian comedic actors of all time, and one of my greatest heroes. Yeah. Talk about heroes. Yeah. Man, that I was more nervous about rehearsing with Glenn Robbins. I like Sting and I like the Police, but I'm more of a heavy metal guy. Yeah. And here I am rehearsing with Glenn Robbins to sing. So during that time, like, I'm doing all these shows, but it wasn't. I did a show called Doctor on Channel 9, and I got nominated for a Logie for that.
Fantastic.
I did full burst. For those that know the show, I played a character called Joey during the first season. I'm the lead character's best friend, and I'm dying from cancer, and he, spoiler alert, he euthanizes me. And they actually wrote Japanese. That's right. They wrote. Claudia Carvin, who was the producer, found out one night, because we were filming out in the countries, and one night, it's because it's set out in the bush. We're filming out in this little town called Mudgee, and one night, we've got a night off, and so I put on a stand-up show for the whole crew and cast. Great. And Claudia comes down and she's like, I had no idea that you did stand-up and all this sort of stuff. And then Roger Corser, who's the lead actor, goes, and he also speaks Japanese. And she goes, what? So they wrote in that part of my bucket list as I'm dying is that I learn Japanese, and my last words as I die on screen are arigato. That's great. It was great. So, but at the time, I'm also working as the warm-up guy, and this is to the point before. This is where I kind of started to unravel a little bit, because I couldn't reconcile my ego with, I'm working with these legends, and I'm getting nominated for a Logie, but then I'm the fluffer, and so I'm working. I kind of unraveled a little bit on The Voice, because that year in 2016, I was just having a really tough time with it, because I couldn't reconcile the fact that my screen career was going well, but it wasn't quite.
Is there a sense that you're still under the surface, waiting to break through and get air?
Yeah.
Because it feels like, you're in the company of every single name you're dropping.
I've worked in.
There's no bigger names.
The biggest names in the business.
So
biggest names in the business, and not just acting with them, but on those
producing
talent shows,
content and
producers, working with the best producers, with the best writers. I'm working with pop stars like Paula Abdul. I'm working with Ronan Keating and Ricky Martin and the Spice Girls, Mel B, who follows me on Instagram still, you know, and it's like, so my ego's going, you're this, but then this production manager is yelling at me because, you know, I was 5 minutes late for the call time or whatever, and she yelled at me one day and she said, "You better be effing funny, Dave," because I was late. But she wasn't my regular production manager. She was just filling in.
Right.
And the other guys that I'd worked with up until that point kind of gave me a bit of latitude. They knew that I was
the animal you were.
They knew how hard that job was. It's a 12-hour a day job. You do 2 sets of audiences, and those audiences are like 3,000 people, and so you're for 5 hours straight, you're filling in, you're keeping the energy up. When there's a break in recording, you don't know if the break is for 5 minutes or for 50 minutes, and sometimes it would be. Sometimes I'm waiting. On one day, we're waiting on Will.i.am for 2 hours, and so now the audience is hostile because they're like, "Hurry up!" And I'm the guy, I'm the front man out there, and so I was very well looked after by a lot of producers and a lot of the on-air talent. But at the same time, you know, I was crew, you know, and which is there's nothing wrong with crew.
No, of course not.
But it was this weird kind of place in between crew member and then talent. And
it's like a crisis of identity almost, isn't it?
It kind of was. And so I did kind of burn that bridge. I'm actually back doing Australia's Got Talent next month, so able to mend that bridge. But it was a really tough time, and then luckily around that time I got into Muriel's Wedding, the musical. Musical made about the film, for those overseas, about a very famous Australian film, Muriel's Wedding, launched the career of Tony Collette and Rachel Griffith. So I had a big part in that musical. That musical finished in 2019. At the end of 2019, I moved back. Because I'd moved out of my apartment in Sydney, and I finished the tour we're living on the road that whole year, and I moved back to the Gold Coast, moved back in with Mum and Dad, and I was going to do the summer at home with my parents here on the coast, and then boom, COVID. And I'm like, all right, I guess we're hanging out at Mum and Dad's. As I'd say in my stand-up, I'm 42 years old, single, unemployed, living with a 70-year-old couple who don't share a bed. And, you know, this was not on the vision board, you know. So, but it was good because it enabled me to take stock and just put the brakes on a little bit and put life into perspective. And
what was that, just to slow you down, I don't mean to stop your flow, but when you say, you know, moving back in with Mum and Dad, just at the point that when you get to that stage, have you ever heard or sat with them and had the conversation about how they see their boy, like the kid that was doing the classes, and when you just think of everything you just said in the last 10 minutes, that trajectory of all these experiences that you sound like you've created opportunity in the absence of opportunity, and it also sounds like you've seized opportunity in place of locking up and being afraid. So they're wonderful, wonderful qualities that it's obviously compounded. Those opportunities have compounded then on themselves by the listening to you. What was the feeling coming back to Mum and Dad? Were they able to tell you, acknowledge that? Could they see that?
It's a weird one. They, as I say, Dad's an old army officer, and he suffers from PTSD. Right. He's quite closed off to a lot of that stuff. Yeah. So, which is kind of part of my journey to get into comedy, because my brother and my sister are both. My sister's a school teacher who's married to an army vet. Right. My brother's an army. He's still in the army, and I'm kind of this middle kid going, look at me, I'm over here, look at me. You know?
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that. So Mum I talk to about it a lot, and Mum, I keep Mum up to date with all that sort of stuff. But a funny story about my dad was that on that sketch comedy show, Open Slather, I'm doing a sketch with Gina Riley, again, one of the most famous comedians in Australia of all time, one of my all-time heroes. Absolute hero from Fast Forward days in '91. You know, so I'm doing, it's the very first sketch, and I'm doing it with Gina Riley, and I'm playing my first sketch with her, and she's playing Liz Hayes, the 60 Minutes reporter, and I'm playing a naval officer. Right. And the premise of the sketch is we've got a border control problem with, ironically, overseas pop stars coming in to judge our talent shows, right? So there's a immigration thing. So anyway, so I'm a naval officer, and I remember telling Gina on the day, I said to her, this is actually an impression of my dad, and she's like, oh, that's interesting, and I showed her how my dad talked. I won't do it now, but so I'm doing this impression of my dad. Anyway, so when it airs, Dad's not watching it, but he walks past it, and it's on in the lounge room. Dad walks past, Mum's watching it. Dad stops and he says two things to my mum. The second thing he says is, "Oh, is that David?" And the first thing he says was, "They're not the right badges on that uniform."
Perfect.
"Oh, is that David?" You know, that
tells you everything. That tells everything. In just that story, doesn't it?
Sure does. Yeah. So, look, it was tough, I guess, moving back in with Mum and Dad, but having that connection with family, you know, I've got my nieces here on the coast, and you know, getting to take them to netball and getting to take them to Girl Guides and you know, to different things was really good. And
I get the feeling you're a guy that there's nothing left in the tank. You know, like if I'm going to give you me, I'll give you all of me.
Yeah.
And the great thing about an artist that will do that is they're interesting, because they'll give you all of themselves. You know, there's the pain, there's the joy, there's the abstract, the silliness.
Yeah.
But then I think, as you said much earlier too, that you ultimately are left with yourself too, and you have to make peace with that person and have a centre to come back to.
Totally.
Because in the absence of the centre, you're kind of billowing in the wind and you're everything to everybody.
Yes.
But you have to find a way to be something to you in those moments when there are no lights and there's no applause, no laughter.
Absolutely.
And how does that person sit when they're still? You know, I remember hearing Robin Williams talk about and I'm probably going to misrepresent this, but you may know the story better than I do. But I remember hearing him in a chat show years ago talk about life was pretty lonely as a kid, and he would sit up in the attic and he had action figures and toys, and he would disappear up there for hours. And he said he described creating this world where he could lose himself, that there were these characters living, and that's where he would start to play with, you know, streams of consciousness and tell stories, because it was born out of this inherent sense of being alone. And he was filling the solitude with expressing noise, which ultimately grows into comedy, and as you say, through the pain of loneliness comes this great joy for the world. But you still have to go home and turn the lights off.
That's something that,
and I think it's the hardest thing for real artists to do, rather than those that aren't necessarily giving all that out on a daily basis. It's probably a little easier to contend with being you, because you're only getting so much of me in the day. But if you're getting all of me in a day, there's going to be an hour when I get home when I've got to have something there for me to hold on to. And I guess that's the challenge of being as gifted and as open as you are.
It's, I mean, for example, I don't watch TV. Like I can't watch movies and I can't watch TV shows because it makes me think about work. And it makes me think about my career, and then I start thinking, why aren't I writing? I should be writing. And you know, I need to be with someone. I generally need to be with a romantic partner to enjoy that, because I'm enjoying that with someone as opposed to just enjoying that by myself.
Right. Yeah.
But to that, that certainly was something. I did a lot of therapy over the last few years. I did a lot of work on myself and working out who I was, because otherwise I was going to destroy myself, and I had burned a lot of bridges and had let my ego control me, and I didn't know who I was, and there was a bad breakup in there, in amongst all of that sort of stuff that doesn't help, and so what saved me, and I mentioned this before we started recording, was that around September last year, I'd just started, the comedy clubs up here had just started opening back up, maybe August, September, and I remember seeing, so there was something about, on Facebook, I kept seeing all these people that I knew growing up on the Gold Coast were going out and having barbecues and parties and all that sort of stuff. And the guys from the stunt show here at Movie World, the Hollywood stunt driver show, Scotty Gregory and Tom Gillander, who I've known for 20 plus years.
Talented dudes,
Yeah, I said, I wrote a message to Scotty. I said, hey man, next time you go out, I'm here. Because people forget that you're back. Yeah. So, people, and so I kept saying these things and going, oh, people don't know that I'm here. So I was like, hey Scotty, just so you know, next time you go out, let me know. I'd love to come out and hang out. Yeah. And we went out that night, and Tommy goes straight away, oh, mate, we've got a role in the Hollywood stunt driver show.
Perfect.
Do you want to do that? Do you want to come and do the deputy role? And I was like, Tommy, I would love to do that. Yeah. I'm sitting at home at my parents' house doing nothing. And a lot of people, I think once you've been through that, TV and all this sort of stuff, the idea of coming back to work at a theme park to some people might seem like it's a step backwards in a way, with and all due respect to theme park performers, and obviously you know how much I love theme parks. Yeah. But for me it was like, oh yes, finally a purpose. I've sat around all year with trying to work out what my purpose is, and I get to go back to Movie World where it all kind of began for me, and I get to perform in that stadium where I performed in Police Academy. That history. That's all that history, and and I walked in, and the smell of the popcorn, and the sound of the kids laughing, and the roller coasters, and that's and so I've been back, and I've just finished shooting a new ABC comedy last week with Grant Denyer and Brooke Satchwell and Nakia Louie. I did a role on The Young Rock, which I think you had a role in.
Oh, let's not talk about me. But let me tell you about my time on set. No, but that's fantastic.
It's coming back. Like the work is coming back, but instead of me rushing back to Sydney to try and chase this whatever it was that I was chasing, whether it was fame or whatever that was, I am so happy doing a couple of days a week at Movie World. I love coming in here. Part of my job, as you would know, in that show is that I do the warm up before the show, and oh man, I only do about 10 or 15 minutes, but it's my favourite part of the day. I love it. I love doing all those old gags. And again, it's that surprising people. Suddenly there's this, and I've created a character that's got an accent and he's a whole thing now.
Fully formed.
Fully formed being now, and performing that character at Movie World, and actually reminds me I've got to get back to Sam at Showtime, because he wants me to start doing the show at SeaWorld as well. Yeah. And I'm happy to do it, because it's I'm very casual, and it's when I can, and but I'm so happy. I've actually moved out of mum and dad's, and I've moved into an apartment on the Gold Coast. This is where I'm going to base myself.
Great.
If I need to do stuff in Sydney, I'll go and do stuff in Sydney.
Yeah.
If I don't, I'm so happy and contented with where I'm at, which is so different to where I was 2 years ago.
It's interesting hearing you talk about when the boys were checking in on you and you were saying, hey, you know, I'm here, let me know. And then that unfolds into an opportunity when Tommy has the light moment. Hey, you should be. I think sometimes, and this may not be the case there, but I think sometimes with a personality like your own too, when you are seemingly on all the time and larger than life, and you've had these heights, and you seem to other people like you've got this down, you got life down, you got your talent.
Social media does that, doesn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
You're funny. Yeah. You speak your truth. You're up on stage playing music. You don't need to be checked in on.
No.
And it's your blessing and your curse, right? Because you're a light that would draw energy to you, and the curse is who's checking in on you? Because you shine so brightly, we just figured you were fine.
Yeah.
And I've known a few people during my professional life in and around the business that have had that same condition. And I call it the blessing and the curse, because in one breath it's a blessing, because it draws in attention and it draws in, people feel good in your light.
And that makes you feel good.
You feel good because they're warm and you glow, and it's like your drug.
Yeah.
And no one checks in, not because they're not caring about or thinking about you. They just figure unconsciously, well, you don't need anything. You've got it all down. If anyone was to listen just to some of the journey you've had here, as I say, there'd be people that would just want 5% of those experiences.
Yeah.
So again, the blessing and the curse. But to come full circle, when you say, you know, you've moved out of home, the Gold Coast is your home base, you're back to the joy of the parks. It's almost like the journey of making peace with yourself, right?
Yeah.
And really settling and letting ego move to one side, you know, because ego can be its own thing as well and kind of consumes. Yeah. It's got to be fed.
Yeah.
And then when you realise that it's a false god and that you exist underneath it, you just have to make peace with the thing underneath it. Yeah. When you do that, you know then when you're coming from ego because you can catch it.
Yes.
And you know when you're reacting from ego because you can now pick the difference.
Yeah.
But for the longest time, myself included, when you're coming from ego for a lot of years, you don't know what you know. You don't know what you don't know at the time. But when the head is removed from between the buttocks and you start to confront self, you can then pick the difference between this is me at my core and I know when I'm coming from the ego. Yeah. It sounds like that journey is the one that we're all kind of inherently looking to make. I heard years ago, and it made sense to me as I got older, that the greatest thing a person can hope for in their lives is peace of mind. Yeah. When it's all said and done. Yeah. Because all this noise out here is one thing, and the drive and the ambition. Yeah. But the greatest gift, I remember not really getting it as a younger guy, but as I've gotten older and understanding, you know, people around you pass, stuff happens, there's divorce, there's turmoil and jobs come and go, and start to realise, you know what, I think that's the most important thing above all else. Can I be at peace in my mind? Yeah. Now, if I can do that and still enjoy the stuff I love, maybe I'm halfway home. Yeah,
100%, and that has really become my focus. This, particularly that last year when, and you know, COVID, it took it all away
from everybody.
Which was in itself a blessing and a curse.
Well, I remember hearing, just to quote him again, Mark Maron talking about in his podcast, COVID for him was, I stopped this narcissistic drive of measuring everything I did against the thing that he was doing, or if I'm not working, but I hear he's working. Yeah. And I heard he's got this job, and how come I haven't got that job? I better go and get that job. Mm-hmm. And he said that he was describing how refreshing it was just to go, oh, hang on, no one's working.
No one's got a job.
No one's doing anything. You don't have to compete with someone else's ambitions.
It was...
Because everyone stopped, and it forces you to face you.
100%.
So who are you without the noise?
100%. And that's, and exactly, and that's why I say, you know, I reconnected with my family, you know, and you know, when you're living on the road, when you're touring, when you're here, there, and everywhere, you're seeing your family once a year. But all that noise stopped, and it was. I needed that. I do a bit of stand up about it, you know, and I needed that break, you know. I needed we're so lucky here in Australia that we had the social security system, the safety net that I didn't have rent to pay. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have kids. You know, I was able to move back with my parents. I'm so blessed and lucky to have had that. But yeah, and as I say, when I got that gig back at Movie World, which I just never thought that I would ever be back at Movie World, it really brought that home to me. You know, it really brought it home to me how important just having a purpose is, and not a purpose for your ego, but just a purpose that my job in life is to entertain people. And that's not all that I am. You know, my other purpose is to be a good uncle, a good son, a good brother, you know, and so
last three questions I'd like to ask you before we wrap up. And the first one would be, if you could go back in time and talk to that kid that was in PNG and was looking to find his place and who he was, and started to make some decisions to move himself out and take a risk, what would you tell that kid? It was sort of wrestling, you know, hopping around from one place to the next because of the services and wondering where he's going to be, not getting into that college at that first attempt, and what am I going to do? What would you go back and tell that kid if you could just have a chat with him?
Yeah, I don't know. I've thought about that. Like, I guess I'd probably... part of me thinks that I would say, relax. Yeah, it's going to be okay. It's you're on the right path, and you're doing the right things, and you are going to be okay. And it's all going to work out for you eventually. But then there's another part of me that thinks I wouldn't want to say anything to him.
Right.
Because that was the journey. Yeah, that was the journey in the end, and I had to make those mistakes. And I had to chase those things, and I had to put myself out there, and I had to have those ups and downs, and you know, I'm not sure if I would, because...
Great answer.
Yeah.
What gets you up out of bed in the morning? You probably covered it in your own unique way, but if you had to say it in a statement, what gets you up? Gets you moving?
It's an interesting one, because today I had a bit of a lie-in today, and I was finding it hard to find the motivation to get up today. Yeah, interesting question. I'm kind of blessed. I mean, you know, when it's a Movie World day, it's you got to go to work. Basically, that's what gets me up. But I mean, it's weird because I don't have I don't need an alarm clock, because I don't really have anything. Like, I work at night generally, and so there's, I don't know.
It's interesting, right? There's no right or wrong answer, but what's I guess finally then, it's just curious. When you look back, and you touched on so many things, is there one single moment that if you were asked in the statement, what's the proudest moment you can recall? And I'm sure there's a number of them, but if you had to pick one to go, you know, the first one that pops into my head is this.
That night with Robin Williams was right up there. Yeah. But you're right. There are too many to count. But I think, do you know what? One of them was I did a 1 hour comedy special on ABC. And that was filmed at the Enmore Theatre in front of 1,000 people, and that was individually that was an achievement. Yeah. But again, I feel like that's all career. I think, you know what? It's when my niece, when she tells me she loves me. Yeah. And there's one niece in particular who she's very closed off. She won't say anything. she's a teenager. She's a bit more hard work, but the baby, she's 12 and she does, when she tells me she loves me, that's just, you can't, nothing beats that. That's
Knowing you're loved, having some self-love, probably the two most important things, right?
So important. Yeah. And maybe a proud moment would be actually realizing that it was definitely a life-changing moment when I realized that I was doing it wrong and that I needed help. And that I sought help.
And caught that in you.
I realized that that it was going to go one way or the other,
right.
And that I needed to, and that was probably mid 2019 where I really went, okay, this is something's got to give here, and it hasn't been easy since then. No. But I do know that taking myself to the GP and saying, hey, I need some help, and putting in a mental health plan, and I'd seen therapists and psychologists before, because I think people had told me that I needed to do that, or I thought that that's what I needed to do, but there was a moment there where I went, oh, I really need some help, or this is gonna go in a bad way. So all of that again, all that career stuff, I could tell you a million things that have been wonderful moments, but I think what I've learned is that it's the looking after yourself, and that inner peace that you talk about. And I don't think I've achieved it. There's a ways to go yet. But
I think it's the same for all of us. It's an ongoing quest.
It's an ongoing quest. Yeah.
For people that might be listening, just to stay in that space for a moment, we don't have to dig much deeper. But for people that might be experiencing, some of those similar feelings and thoughts that you described there a little bit. Again, we don't have to go deep. But would you say to those people that you're a testament to the value of just simply reaching out, and that it's okay to reach out and say, hey, you know what, I'm doing it tough here, and I could use a hand.
It's not easy, because, as I said, I had tried to get help before,
right.
but mostly on the back of other people telling me that I needed to, or that I should, and it's something within yourself where when you admit to yourself that you're doing it tough. Because I remember walking out of therapy sessions going, oh, well, that was a waste of time. And it's like, no, the therapy takes some time, and you've actually got to put in work.
That's
you've
right.
actually got to do some really hard work, and there's a lot of motivational podcasts and things that I listen to, but I listen to a lot of like former Navy SEALs. David Goggins is someone that I listen to quite a bit. I'm right into him.
Familiar with him,
and his whole mantra is basically that you've got to put yourself into some suffering. We all look for comfort.
Yeah.
We're all looking for comfort when we feel bad about ourselves, when we feel shame, when we feel guilt, when we feel pain, when our egos are, and so in order to deal with that pain, we go looking for the bottle or the whatever it is.
Distract ourselves.
To distract yourself, and that numbs the pain. And what he's all about is sitting in the pain, and it's uncomfortable, but putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I when I started working out, that was a big thing. I lost a lot of weight, and I changed my entire body composition. I changed my diet. I was very overweight, and now I've got shoulders and arms and legs, and I've built a body. Not that the body's important, but
no, it is. But that's a physical representation of the mental situation you're describing.
Changes. Yes.
That it's a physical representation of the very thing you're talking about. We've talked about it as a theme in this podcast too, and it's one of those things I go back to a lot. Is if there's no adversity, there's no growth.
Exactly.
I do some keynote speaking each year, and I've done for over a decade with Rotary for kids. And I talk to them about being unafraid of adversity, be unafraid of being challenged, be unafraid of grief, be unafraid of suffering, because out of the endurance of those moments comes wisdom and growth if you allow yourself to go through it. It's like when I hear people say, you know, well, I got over that. Well, I got over that. And you don't get over anything.
No.
The point is to go through it.
Yes.
How's your situation there? I'm going through it.
Yes.
Did you ever get over that breakup? Not so much. I did go through it, and I wear the lessons and the scars and the learnings, and that is the point. And it's a hard one to learn without going on. I mean, I could share some counter stories too, maybe for another episode.
Yeah.
But listen, I want to thank you for being as brave as you've been and as honest as you've been. We've never said more than good morning to each other.
Yeah.
So this is a really good, organic conversation to have laid down. And I think for people listening in, a great opportunity to think about some big questions and also be inspired, because it's not many people have had a life like you've had, you know, to touch the hem of sitting opposite or looking into the eyes of an idol that changed your life. And this idea of traveling, learning new languages, never being afraid to throw yourself into the unknown, because somehow intuitively you know, I'm going to grow out of the back of this. And we're all a work in progress. There is no arrival in this life. It's a constant flow up until the end, right? So the thing is to say, I'm here now, I wonder where I'll be in the next chapter.
Yeah.
But it's all chapters.
Oh, totally. Just on that point, maybe for me to finish up, like when we're talking about taking notes and failure in comedy, and I've said so many times to young comedians, you got to fail. And I've said it for years. I knew that that's what you had to do. I knew that with my art, with my performing, with learning guitar, you got to fail. You've got to fail. But I didn't. It's the same principle in life. That's what I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I was fine.
Yeah.
I was fine dying in front of an audience.
Yeah.
I was fine making those mistakes and learning from those. I'm fine you give me notes.
Yeah.
I'll take your notes
right.
on, and I'm fine, because I know
great.
that's how you grow.
Yeah.
But personally, beneath that,
Yeah.
I didn't want to be making mistakes
Well
in
said.
life. I'm right.
No,
you know?
Don't give me the death of ego.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid I have death of ego.
Absolutely.
You
So,
know?
yeah.
But you're right. You've got to taste blood on your lips, get your heart broken, stand back up, and then go again.
Exactly.
That's the point.
Exactly.
Mate, you've been a terrific inspiration, a great conversation, and
you,
a real honour to sit and talk with you and capture a little bit of that incredible sprawling life you've had. Thanks for sitting down and making time on Park Life.
Thanks, Michael.
Been an honour.
Really appreciate it. Me too.
I hope you enjoyed this latest episode. You'll find Park Life on Twitter and me, Michael Croker, on Instagram at Mike_Croker. See you next time.